Sandra. Yeah, welcome. Perfect. All righty. So welcome everyone. I started the recording, so all of your cameras have been turned off and you've been muted, but feel free to turn them back on. And we're just about to jump into the fourth session of the Women in Resilience Finance Mentorship Program. Just give me a minute. I'm just in the process of organizing how I share my screen. Just a moment. Here we are. Perfect. Okay, so I can't see most of you. So if you want to just go ahead and turn back on your cameras, feel free, and we'll get started in about 1 minute. Ready. Okay, perfect. I think we can jump right in. So welcome back, everyone, to the fourth session of the Women in Resilience Finance Mentorship Program, where we'll be discussing green and inclusive microfinance with 4 of our mentors today. I'll be introducing them a little bit later in today's session. Just quick aspect or a quick review a little bit on what we'll be talking about. Which was sent in advance by one of the mentors. So we'll be focusing today on advancing gender smart climate finance for MSMEs in the Caribbean, bridging the gender finance gap in climate smart sectors, ensuring gender inclusive participation in climate finance, and also lastly, how to unlock investment for women entrepreneurs in climate adaptation. So 4 really big and important topics. And as I had mentioned before, how the session will be organized as sort of as an active discussion. There will be a little bit of a theoretical introduction using slides, but afterwards we will just jump right into engaging together using guided questions. So if each of you could discuss and engage as much as possible, that's sort of the point and the goal of today's session. And so just a quick view looking at the agenda. As per usual, we will be recapping the session from last week on the investor's perspective. This will be done by the third buddy team. Afterwards, I'll take a moment to introduce our wonderful mentors for today. And then we'll go on into an interactive discussion on today's topic of gender inclusive microfinance. And I'll end the session with a couple of announcements for these sessions that will be happening over the next week. So with that, I would then give the floor to the 2 participants from the buddy team number 3, which is Donna and LaShawn, who will be presenting what we learned last week. So LaShawn, I believe you're presenting the first part, so I will give you the virtual mic to start your presentation.
Thank you, Benedict, and good morning, everybody. I trust that we are all having a wonderful day thus far. So my buddy and I, Donna, we're going to be quickly recapping our last session. So you may proceed to change the slide for me. Thank you. So last session, we were exposed to an understanding of what green financing is from an international investor's perspective. We explored potential partnerships to develop green products. We discussed the guidelines for microfinancing institutions on approaching inclusive green finance, and we were also given examples of funds investing in green finance, inclusive green finance, that is. You may change, yeah. So what is green financing? Green financing refers to financial investments that support the development of environmental protection. It enhances climate change, and it basically provides funding for projects that help to reduce our carbon emissions and to promote renewable energy. And in green financing, there are some key features. We have an environmental focus, and there is also the innovative financial products that can come from green financing, which includes, like green loans, bonds, climatic insurance for renewable energy, and things like that. There is also an adaptation and resilience, which helps communities and businesses. And most importantly, I'd say it also helps women who are directly affected by this. Thank you for changing the slide.
Is this the correct slide, LaShawn, the context, or is it the next one?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was talking ahead, so I didn't even realize that we
That's
were
okay.
here.
No worries. Go ahead.
The context of green financing for international investors. So, as you know, that green financing has become a major focus for international investors. It is the future. It's where the world is heading to, and these this basically represents an opportunity to make a positive impact and to produce financial um, strategies for the long run, for the term, for the future. And there are some key concepts of green financing we also learned. Um, it involves the managing and the monitoring of environmental strategies and risk. There is also internal risk and external risk. Internally, it focuses on reducing the entity's environmental footprint, reduce waste emissions and things like that. And externally, it involves assessing and clarifying the risk loads in applications related to environmental impact. There is also the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which requires funds to be disclosed to disclose their social and environmental impacts, which is very much important because we need to know, exactly how we're being impacted. And then there is also the EU Green Taxonomy. This classifies sustainable economic activities to avoid greenwashing. Next slide, please. Thank you.
You can
So
go ahead,
next,
LaShawn. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
we began to look at the key requirements of the FDR. Financial institutions must disclose their sustainability risk. We need to know how it's being impacted environmentally, socially, governance wise. They need there's also adverse impacts, the negative impacts of their investment that it may have on on sustainability, sorry, example, the carbon footprint and water usage and such forth. And they also need to disclose their sustainability objectives. We need to know how these funds um, aim to achieve the environmental or social goals. Yeah. Good. So there are also some key objectives where we need to have transparency, prevention of greenwashing, and standardized reporting. There needs to be the establishment of uniform requirements for financial disclosure and making it easier to compare funds as well. Next. Next, could you, it's not changed for me. I'm not sure if you already did it.
Yes, do you want the key requirements or the table of the different regulations?
You can go to the table.
Sure. Here you go.
One second. I probably have a little delay. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. So this is where I'll hand you over to Donna to go through the the regulatory requirements in Latin America and the Caribbean. Go ahead, buddy.
Hi, morning everybody. How are you going? This
Morning, Donna.
table, hi. We had a few questions in the session. So this table literally was trying to answer one of the questions that we had. So this table represents the ESG regulatory requirements impacting Latin America and the Caribbean. So we spoke about the SFDR, which the effective date was 2021. For 2024, they're adding EU, the regulations on deforestation, and we have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We also have the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So these are all basically based for Latin America and the Caribbean. They also have one pending, which is the US Securities and Exchange Commission for climate-related disclosure. So it was just a short table, just to give you an idea of what we have to use when we're doing these requirements. So it was just to answer the question that was posed in the group. LaShawn, you can go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm EU green SR context. LaShawn? Then can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, the EU green taxonomy is a classification system that helps define which economic activities are environmentally sustainable. Its goal is to provide clear guidelines for investors, companies, and policymakers to identify sustainable investments and avoid greenwashing, misleading claims of being environmentally friendly. Next slide. How the taxonomy works, where with companies and investors reporting whether their activities meet the technical criteria outlined in taxonomy. The criteria specify the conditions under which each activity is deemed sustainable. So for example, we have solar power plant qualifies under the climate change mitigation. It's a renewable energy project. Construction projects must meet energy efficiency and biodiversity protection criteria to be classified as green. Next slide. Implications for non-EU countries, like for instance, in the Guyana context, even though the EU green taxonomy is primarily for European markets, it has global influence. So particularly on the international investors who adopt these standards worldwide, they'll be using those criteria. Next slide. Can we skip this particular one? 15, 16, and 17. Next slide there. The net zero targets. This was another one that we had a question on. So this is just to answer some of the questions. So under the Caribbean umbrella, several of the Caribbean countries have committed to achieving the net zero emissions by 2050, aligning with the broader Latin American Caribbean regions pledged to reach the net zero by the same time frame. This includes efforts to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 through initiatives focused on renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, and climate resilient development across sectors like agriculture and tourism. Next slide. All right, the key points about the Caribbean net zero commitment. So it's region-wide. So most of the Caribbean nations are already ratified with the Paris Agreement. They focus on adaptation. So due to the vulnerability of climate change, I mean, we're a hurricane-centered region. Caribbean countries prioritize building resilience through adaptation strategies alongside emission reduction efforts. So the challenges and the needs, we're in order to achieve our net zero in the Caribbean presents challenges like high dependence on fossil fuels and limited financial resources and the need for international climate finance support. For instance, with Barbados, the Mia Motley, who is our cheerleader for the region, who represents us at COP, she is considered one of the main climate action leaders in the area, in our region, I should say. Next slide. This is just a quick overview for practical guidelines for microfinance institutions. So we're looking at we're assessing the needs, we're developing strategies, we're implementing training, utilizing tools, fostering partnerships, monitoring impact, include gender, and we're enhancing reporting. So next slide. This here was just a quick overview of some of the tools and innovations in green finance. So we looked at the Green Index 3.0, we looked at the gender lens financial products, and we did real protection insurance and digital MRV systems. Next slide. Taxonomy on the climate adaptation. This was the next level, the next step. So climate adaptation refers to the adjustments in natural or human systems in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli or their effects, would moderate harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. So it was just a quick overview of what taxonomy was. Next slide. Examples that we use, for instance, in Dominica, you spoke about the building of the seawalls to protect coastal communities, developing drought-resistant crops, implementing water conservation measures, creating green spaces in cities to reduce heat island effects, investing in early warning systems for extreme weather events. Next slide. The challenges in developing the taxonomy is the complexity of climate change impacts and adaptation responses. So different regions have different climatic issues that they have to deal with. So in the States, we had the fires, we had the flooding. Caribbean is the hurricane. In the East, we have not tornadoes, the other version of hurricanes. So we lack a standardized definition and metric, the difficulty in measuring the effectiveness of adaptation actions, and need for interdisciplinary collaboration and knowledge sharing. So we have to come together to work together to overcome some of these challenges. The benefits of the taxonomy: it provides a common framework for understanding and discussing climate adaptation, facilitates the identification and prioritization of adaptation needs and actions, supports the development of effective adaptation policies and strategies, enables the tracking and evaluation of adaptation progress. So the next step would be verification mechanism. Pretty much the steps that have been taken here are pretty much like project management. So each step follows literally the tracks of project management. So at the end of going through the process of the taxonomy, putting things in place, we have to verify what we've done. So the verification mechanism are essentially to ensure that the climate adaptation actions are being implemented effectively and are achieving their intended outcomes. Some key mechanisms for verifying climate adaptation, monitoring, and evaluation, as for those who do project management would know: audits and reviews, certification and standards, transparency and accountability, technology and innovation. In this case, one of the examples will be data analytics. Alliances play a crucial role in various aspects of the human society, from international relations to business and social movements. So they enable cooperation, resource sharing, and collective action to achieve goals that might be unattainable individually. So understanding the dynamics of alliances is essential for navigating complex relationships and achieving success in a collaborative world. So two of the examples that were given last week was the green monoproduct and the farmer cooperative. So we also had in last week's production at the example of green funds. So the resilience fund with the quality, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, was the example they gave. But I also saw that we had green bonds, blue bonds, social bonds, and they're all interspersed throughout the Caribbean and Latin America at this point in time. And I think that ends our presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Donna and LaShawn, for the very thorough presentation. I think you really went through basically all of the topics that we discussed. So much appreciated. And thank you. And I'll send over these slides also to the participants so that they have an overview as well of what we learned last week. So moving on, I am very excited to present the mentors that we have planned for today. So we're in a very big treat because we have not only one, not two, but actually four powerhouse experts on inclusive and gender smart climate finance to discuss the sector's most pressing topics, current trends, and brainstorm sort of on possible strategies. And together they bring really decades of experience in shaping financial solutions that are not only innovative, but also really impactful. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Winsome Lensley, who is an international development specialist, currently the president and CEO of Dev Solutions Consulting. So Dev Solutions provides advisory and consulting services in micro and small businesses, so MSMEs, on development financing, as well as in the US, the Caribbean, and frontier markets. With her team, she also has conducted access to finance assessments, designed projects to increase micro and small business financing, and designed and implemented access to finance training programs for business support organizations and entrepreneurs. So really an expert on MSME financing there. She's currently the Caribbean representative on the advisory committee for the U.S. government-funded Inter-American Foundation, and she was previously the lead specialist for the Caribbean IDB Lab, for which she also received the prestigious Antonio Ortiz Mena Award for her work and her contributions to the institution in the Caribbean. Next up, afterwards, we have also Nicole Pitter-Patterson, who is an international development specialist with over 20 years of experience in women's economic empowerment, inclusive finance, MSME capacity building, and climate finance. She has a proven track record in designing and implementing capacity building programs that enhance climate resilience, gender inclusion, and sustainable resource management across the Caribbean, Africa, the MENA region, and Asia. Also joining us today is Nikki Armacost, who is the Managing Director of ARC Finance, whose mission is to link the fields of finance, energy, water, and sanitation. ARC's financial institution partners have provided access to clean energy for over 4.5 million people in a range of countries, including Afghanistan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Nicaragua, and Haiti. And Nikki is also currently the mayor of Hastings-on-Hudson since 2019, for which under her leadership, Hastings is also currently the highest ranking climate smart community in New York State. So congratulations, Nikki, on that. And finally, we also have Telly Valerie Onu, who is a multidisciplinary expert with over 25 years of experience in climate adaptation, resilience finance, and innovative financial solutions. She specializes in designing innovative, transformative financing mechanisms like the Green Birth Blended Performance Bond, which mobilizes funding for resilient maritime infrastructure in small island developing states. She's also a founder, and she also, or her work in general, empowers entrepreneurs, particularly women, through initiatives like working with the World Bank, German saving banks, international cooperation, Caribbean Development Policy, Development Center, as well as the 2X Global Research Project, and in general impacting over 500 entrepreneurs, including over 200 women. So I hope I got everything right. I didn't make too many mistakes in each of your introductions. So yeah, thank you both, or thank you to all four of you for being here, for your time, your engagement. It really means a lot. And I am super excited for what the session has to offer. So with that, we can jump right in, and I would give you the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Benedict. And it's wonderful to be with all of you. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. We wanted to make this very practical rather than theoretical. So I'll just jump in right now with a very short set of slides just to set the context, not anything very theoretical, because I think we want a very practical discussion this morning. So could you flip the slide, please? Could you jump to slide 5, Benedict? I think thank you. Okay, just to start, I wanted to just get some definitions out of the way, because in some ways, the Caribbean is rather unique in the sense that when we think about microenterprises, for example, there's no common definition across the region. And so oftentimes it's very difficult to know what you mean when you're focusing on access to finance for a microenterprise. There are various definitions from Jamaica, which focuses on, say, 1 to 15 employees with a revenue of less than 15 million Jamaican dollars, to a Belize, which has a broader definition. Some also include investment in their definition. Also, when we think about microloans, based on the cost of living in various countries in the region, there are differences as well in terms of country. A $2,500 loan in Belize would not be useful at all in, say, a Trinidadian context. So we have to bear these in mind as well when we think about solutions and green finance solutions for microenterprises, and specifically in our case, women-owned businesses. I just wanted to throw up a definition, which I'm sure you all know, of inclusive green microfinance. But the issue here is really, how do we bring these solutions down to the community level where they really need to be? I think the discussion so far has been very macro, looking at sort of policies that government are implementing in the climate resilience space, commitments that they have made at the Paris conference level and so forth. But when the rubber hits the road, really, and if we're talking about sustainability, we really need to take a bottom-up approach to this. And in this conversation, we're going to be focusing on women in particular. Next slide, please. Right, so we know that microenterprises across the Caribbean comprise between 70 and 8% of our businesses. Most of our businesses are very small. Sole proprietorships, many of them are informal. And as we all know, the access to finance issue is a major challenge. In fact, as you see here on the slide, approximately 70% of women-owned businesses, in particular in the region, report access to finance as a major constraint, right? In the case of women entrepreneurs, the challenges they face, access to finance, access to markets and so on, are amplified by sociocultural factors, their role in the household, juggling many different roles, biases, either conscious or not, that they face in terms of access to finance and access to resources and capacity building as well. When we talk about climate, however, we know that women-owned microenterprises and businesses across the board that are owned or led by women are disproportionately affected by climate events. We know that these businesses are usually small, they're usually, in many cases, home-based, and they tend to be found mostly in those industries that are vulnerable to climate events and other disasters, tourism, agriculture, and the service industry more broadly. So here, I think, because of all these combined factors, microfinance presents a very important area of opportunity for green finance. Certainly, this is where we can make changes and cultural changes around climate resilience stick, right? So let's turn our attention now to looking at the next slide. So let's look at the business case. The business case for inclusive green finance supports climate mitigation, adaptation, etc. Let me just say that it's only in recent years that the focus has sort of shifted somewhat away from mitigation towards adaptation. And certainly in the financing space, many institutions, many banks, for example, in the Caribbean, are not really focusing on adaptation per se at this point. So this presents an opportunity here as well to embed some of these strategies that will directly benefit women-owned companies. So we know that there's a definite link between inclusive green finance and economic resilience across the board. Inclusive green finance supports resilience in several ways by supporting adaptation, for example, of small producers, financing small green businesses, for example, through initiatives like the Greenpreneurs program for the Eastern Caribbean that just closed a few months ago, increasing financial inclusion to support access to climate financing for vulnerable groups, youth, women, and so forth. Next slide. Given the fact, as I said before, that women-owned businesses are disproportionately affected, we know that women can also be a key agent of change for climate resilience, supporting climate resilience, whether it be in the context of the household or in the context of business, be it micro, small, or in some instances, medium, right? So in implementing these green finance initiatives with a gender lens would include things like financing women-owned businesses in green sectors, providing microfinance for sustainable agriculture, providing tailored insurance products, parametric insurance, etc., to protect women-owned businesses, yes, but also at the household level, insurance that would be appropriate there on a micro level. Most importantly, perhaps, the aspect of financial literacy, focusing specifically on improving access to finance for green investments, green initiatives, green projects. Next slide, please. Now, as you know, there has been a lot going on, even in the microfinance space in the Caribbean. EcoMicro is a clear case in point. I'm just throwing up a slide here that shows the overall program results versus the Caribbean. A number of credit unions and banks, even some of you, I think, who are in this presentation, benefited from the EcoMicro program. But of course, there's a lot more to go. There are many initiatives that are going on in the region now, broadly speaking, and we have a list that we can share with you later. Everything from the development banks, many of whom are now Green Climate Fund certified, to NGOs and so on. So there's a spectrum of things going on. But the issue is, to what extent are these initiatives actually drilling down with a gender lens to benefit women in the households and women businesses? With that, I think I'm going to switch. I have another slide that sort of throws up some reading material that would be useful to you. We'll come back to that later, but I'd like to switch now to the discussion. And we're going to start sort of from a foundational level at a general overview, global perspective, and then we're going to drill down into the Caribbean. So I'm going to throw out my first question, which is, and this is to Nikki and Telly in particular. What are some of the key factors that financial institutions should consider? And here I'm thinking of microfinance institutions in particular. What should they consider when designing green inclusive microfinance products to ensure that women are adequately supported and women's resilience, economic resilience, and climate resilience are promoted? Let me start with Nikki. If you could sort of give us an idea based on your experience with ARC Finance in Asia, in the Caribbean, and so forth.
Thanks, Winsome, and thanks so much for including me today. What I would say from all of our experience, doesn't matter where we've been working in the world, one of the key lessons learned and key pitfalls is when MFIs launch into green lending without having done proper market research, demand assessment to check what clients want and need. It sounds very basic, but you would be shocked how often it doesn't happen. So the key question is, does anyone really want this program? And there are really two sets of questions that we encourage MFIs to ask. For clients, it's, what do your clients want and need in terms of green loans? Do men and women want the same thing? How should you segment your clients by business type or size, by gender, by location? Are there niche markets, those in the agricultural sector or transportation sector, for example? And are there repeat weather events that you can now anticipate and plan for? And we also encourage MFIs to ask questions about their own operation. So would an energy audit be beneficial to increase energy reliability and promote cost savings. For example, in India, while our partners were investigating providing solar to their clients, they began to learn about the benefits of solar and decided it made sense to put solar on several of the remote branches of the MFI, which experienced regular blackouts, so that they could keep the computers and the lights working, which were obviously essential to their business. So it wasn't intended from the beginning, but it was a kind of corollary, if you like, benefit from exploring energy finance for that institution. And once the demand assessment's been done, MFIs need to decide which part of the market to serve, the business model that makes sense for them, setting out goals, planning pilot projects. And then the key thing is making sure that core staff are on board. So staff training and education is really important. And if the impetus for the green lending is coming from staff lower down in the MFI, top management needs to be brought on board. Otherwise, the program will just stall in its tracks. So we tell MFIs who want to do energy lending to make sure to segregate their energy lending portfolio from the rest of their portfolio, both to show if it's really successful, that's where the success is, and they can really pull out the success. But also, if it's not successful, they can identify the challenges, either address them or shut down the program if it isn't working out. So these seem like really obvious things, perhaps, but you would be surprised how often they're skipped.
Right. Well, thanks so much for that. And obviously, focusing on women in particular, it's important to figure out what's required both at the household and the business level, yes?
Exactly.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to you now, Telly. Could you give us some sense about the sort of ecosystem level considerations that need to be factored in when microfinance institutions are considering going in the green inclusive microfinance direction?
Thank you, Winsome. So just to echo what Mayor Amakos just said, the fundamentals are really very important.
Could you speak a little loud? Could you go closer to the mic, Telly? You're a little bit distant. It's a little better now. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the fundamentals are really key in terms of us understanding the target beneficiaries. And I will come from a regional perspective. We don't do this really well. For every different industry we have, we've always gone from a product orientation instead of a stakeholder, beneficiary, customer type of orientation. And for over the years, I know within the financial sector, there have been kind of movements towards this customer centricity, but we still think the customer centricity is customer service. It is not. So also, there have also been a lot of narratives about innovation. We talk about it, we go to meetings, but no one has actually taught us how to innovate and what that process is. So if we take parallels from the startup ecosystem with lean innovation, design thinking framework, this is what is fundamentally missing on the supply side of things, as well as the demand side. But if you look at it with the startup ecosystem and so on, more and more with all the entrepreneurship training and so on that's going on, even the startups have a better sense of business model innovation and how to innovate. We're dealing with, at least in our context, and Winsome did indicate, micro is different for different parts of the region, but holistically, we have a very bank-centric culture, and that model is over 100 years with one set parameter of what it was set for. And if you look at our historical origins or our history, pretty much it's all a commercial banking model, which then you have, I don't know whether you call it the missing middle or just the whole missing part from beginning to end, but everything is stuck in the upstream. You can't get anything to move downstream. Why? Because the very systems we have in place are modeled for already commercial activities based on our history of trade and agriculture, etc. So fundamentally, even you have credit unions and all these other newer organizations still borrowing the same model. So that's gap number one, not understanding the model and so on. So fundamentally, that's missing. Being able to pivot, design business model innovation within the institutions that are tailored for the beneficiaries. And then second thing, we do need more products that are aligned and tailored to the beneficiaries.
Right.
So fisheries, agriculture, these are all sectors that we haven't figured out the model yet.
Right. So I neglected to talk about, you touched on this, Telly, about the fact that there is a myriad of different kinds of institutions in the Caribbean providing microfinance. Many of, in terms of true microfinance institutions that don't rely on payday loans, let's say, there are very few of those. So most of the so-called microfinance institutions are actually credit unions that are locked into a particular structure. That's one. Then there are some commercial banks that are trying to provide microfinance, but they're not geared, they're not set up to do that. And then you have, some online solutions, and you have the payday loan folks whose NPLs look really good because they're just pulling the payments from salary deductions, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think we're locked into a particular model that doesn't lend itself to innovation. It means a whole disruption, to use a phrase of what's happening here in this country, in the US, that is. There needs to be some disruption in the system, right? To focus more on design thinking around making the customer the center, right, of the innovation, which is what design thinking is all about. So I'm glad you raised that linkage between design thinking and what needs to happen to move the needle in terms of approaching this whole green inclusive microfinance with a gender lens. So I want to bring this a little bit even deeper now into the Caribbean, by let's talk about some practical examples that have worked. And I'm going to ask Nicole to lead off on this, but I also want you, Telly, and Nikki to contribute. Can you share an example of a successful project that's worked, and how, and comment, if you can, extent to which this could be scaled in the region? So I want to start with Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Winsome. Hi, everybody. Nicole Peter Patterson. Great to be here. I'm speaking also from my experience and expertise as the 2X Global ambassador for the Caribbean region. I'll give you the context of 2X Global, which is the Gender Lens Financing Global Institution. Answering the question in terms of successful projects in the Caribbean, it's we're extended to LA for the LAC.
That's fine.
Because it's just
I was being very optimistic, Nicole.
It's just the reality of what it is we have on the ground. But that's going to change after these 14 participants roll out their program. The bottom line is that these kinds of successful initiatives will require effective strategies. You spoke about design thinking that Telly has raised, for us to be able to implement gender smart financial products. These gender smart financial products need to integrate climate adaptation, as all the colleagues have already spoken about, resilience funding, and in terms of maybe doing a bit of thinking as to where those opportunities could be. I think it's very clear from everything in terms of where the Caribbean is at now, that it's clear that investments need to be made in sustainable and renewable energy opportunities, regenerative agriculture, and climate smart enterprises. As I said, I'm expanding my response to as far as Colombia, right? So there is Banco W, which has implemented a gender social bond. And for the participants, we'll have the information, as Winsome pointed out, on the links. So you can go back and have a look at some of them. There are considerations with regards to the feasibility of undertaking a bond in the Caribbean region, given the smallness and the inability to be able to scale. However, there are elements within this work that Banco W has done, as they have rolled out the first microfinance institution issued gender bond in Latin America. And that was with IDB Invest. So I think that there again, IDB Invest is very committed and engaged across the region. Let me give you another example. However, it's also more LA than C. Deepkin Impact. So Deepkin Impact is a Canadian company that has rolled out what they call the ILU Women's Empowerment Fund, right? And what's interesting that I think is important to reinforce is the need to integrate technical assistance with capacity building programs to be able to change and move the bar for women-led businesses to be able to implement climate smart solutions, right? This is a model that can be adapted for the Caribbean as well. Deepkin also has an investment, pretty substantive, I think, in 2 countries, in Jamaica Jamaica and Barbados, but it's not at the scale of microfinance, which is why I've given the example in terms of what they're doing in Latin America. And they work across 12 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So why is this a best practice, right? Why is this an example that I'm highlighting, Winsome? And that's because the fund exemplifies a gender smart investment approach. And I think that would put to bed the question that you as participating entities may face or will need to make sure you have that validated, right, upfront in your business case. Why there needs to be a distinction in terms of doing it as a gender smart investment approach. So that gender smart investment approach needs to absolutely address the issue of financial inclusion, climate adaptation and resilience, as we've spoken about, business capacity building. And I mean, in terms of what ILU has done, they have significant results that they've seen, in terms of about 700,000 MSMEs that have benefited from their program, of which 530,000 of those have actually been women entrepreneurs. So you see, and that of course is consistent with knowing, as in the case in the Caribbean, as in Latin America, that the significant percentage of MSMEs are women-owned businesses. So let me leave it there, right? And we can jump in with other questions or comments.
Great, thanks, Nicole. I'm going to turn to you, Nikki. I'm thinking about particularly Haiti. So I don't know if you want to give an example of that project.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorites. It was a really interesting, innovative project that we worked on in the Caribbean, and our partner was Suje Express, which is a remittance company. And those of you who know the Haiti context, Suje Express is part of a financial consortium that includes, among other things, a microfinance bank and a phone company. So our idea was to use traditional remittances to finance the purchase of clean energy products in Haiti, which, like many other Caribbean countries, is devastated by extreme weather events almost every year, resulting in long-term power outages. And so we did extensive market research to try and work out what clients wanted, which turned out to be not exactly what we thought, but was very interesting. What they wanted was small, relatively inexpensive solar devices so that they could charge a phone, that was really important to them, and have light in their homes during the frequent blackouts. But it really took us a while to work out the right business model, because in the beginning we were very fixed on the idea that it was the remittance that was originated in the United States, say, that was going to pay for this. But it turned out, after observing Suje Express's operations, that they were selling cell phones, in all their outlets in Haiti. As I mentioned, a phone company was part of their consortium. And so what we did was we started to pivot on the business model that we were suggesting, and we suggested that they sell solar products out of these outlets as well. And So for them, given that they were already selling cell phones, it wasn't too much of a leap of logic, and they started that business. So the idea would be that people would pick up their remittances, and then on their way out, they would buy their product, the solar product, just like they did with phones. And it was unbelievable. There was huge demand. Such Express began to make really a lot of profit. We'd already segregated the solar portfolio, so we knew the program was successful. And what we did was we encouraged them to set up a revolving fund so that they could use that funding, which was the profit from this business, to purchase additional clean energy products so that they were ensuring financial sustainability. And and then there was another interesting innovation. The project expanded by tying in a network of women agents who were selling products out in the community, and they were working on a commission basis. So Soja Express had this huge promotional budget, and they called the campaign Light Up Haiti, which they really did. They love the idea of giving back to the community in this way, and they actually promoted a local Haitian micro solar business through its efforts. So it was super fun and super inspiring to work on. And in terms of your question about scaling, I mean, remittances is $1 billion business. Everyone is trying to work out how to intermediate that flow of funding. So I think there's a lot of potential for scale, but I think you do have to be innovative, and you have to be willing to adjust your business model to sort of accommodate. I hope that answers the question.
No, it really does, because 1 second, Nicole.
Sorry.
1 second.
Go ahead.
1 second, Nicole. No, I was just saying that. No, I've lost my train of thought. Go ahead, Nicole, because I was.
No. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just adding that it's interesting that this is a bundling approach, basically, that the company has done. Because when we look at it, Winsome, that bundling is part of the features that the telecoms are very much pushing now, right? So it could be quite interesting to see if that could be a product developed with the telecoms in terms of the bundling, which we're already familiar with.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well,
go ahead.
Well, I know I remember what I'm going to say. I was going to say. I mean, governments in the region, I'm thinking of Jamaica in particular, have been trying unsuccessfully. Even IDB Lab, when I was there, we tried to channel remittances into productive investment in countries, and it somehow it never seemed to get traction. But this connection between climate and remittances might be particularly given the vulnerabilities in the region, this might be something that we could scale or certainly replicate in at least 1 or 2 countries in the region, given the right circumstances, coming back to Telly's point about ecosystem, customer-centric approaches, right? So it's something to sort of put in the back of our minds as a possibility. And folks who are thinking of designing programs and projects as part of this mentoring program, this might be something you might want to consider as a possibility of pushing.
As you know, Winsome, I could talk about this project for days on end, so I won't add any more, but at the end, if we have any time for questions, we can sort of explore this, and I can tell you what I think made it particularly successful in the Haitian context, and why, you know, what institutions might want to have in mind if they're trying to replicate in other countries. So, but all I can tell you is that on our side, it was one of the most fun projects that I've been involved in. As you know, sometimes it can be super, you know, you can think, oh my God, this is not succeeding, this is not succeeding, this is not succeeding. This one was, oh my God, this is succeeding, but not in the way I thought, you know, which is super fun. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Telly, could you just give us a quick example as well from your side? And then I have a question for the participants. So go ahead, Telly.
Okay. I just wanted to add on the remittance aspect. Channeling remittances into adaptation work when there is trauma, there's a disaster. But when you're talking about anti things, because remittances are generally channeled to the individual, they don't necessarily have an incentive unless you run a campaign. So if you're thinking about a project that's practical, then sensitization and engagement would be one of those things as here's an option to channel.
Yeah, so I do have a question. I'm sorry. I was just saying I have a question on my list about community engagement, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So so now for me, I would say again in the region, we're still in the process of actually, getting some work done in the area. But one of these projects I would say would be deemed successful, while it wasn't really focused solely on women, but it was really on MSMEs in general. So this would have started about 13 years ago, at the time when the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank was looking at trying to amalgamate all the banks, and I'd come in to kind of do a mapping of the indigenous banks, specifically, not the credit unions per se, but look at how they can, use an alternative like synergy to kind of merge. And subsequent to that, we kind of identified the German Savings Bank as a good model for that type of um, um, emerging through synergy. And at that time, it struck me that this German Savings Bank has been in existence for over 100 years. And because of that, they have incorporated a sort of SME. They're built with SMEs, so they incorporate that SME financing quota from the get-go. So post that, we were able to kind of get the German Savings Bank to do an international cooperation initiative in the Eastern Caribbean, and they funded a project that focused on sustainable transformation of the financial sector through financial inclusion of MSMEs in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Now, it's been run for over 8 years. It's just wrapped up last year, and they started off with a pilot country, which was St. Lucia. Because, as someone had alluded to earlier, you do need to have partners and alliances to kind of get these things going. The Chamber of Commerce are very supportive, and they had a bank. I think it was the First National Bank in St. Lucia. That was an indigenous bank, but also one that over the years is kind of open to new models, new innovations. They always try new things to kind of target. So the key thing is the project eventually scaled to the 13 project partners, including the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And I think most fundamental was the Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Scheme, which benefited from a lot of the insights of the project. So what they did was, because of the fact that we have a lack of adaptive products and services in the region, and also we had a lot of hurdles when it comes to interest rates, very short term, the project introduced that needs-based approach to efficient and sustainable access demand-oriented products. They also introduced things like gamified learning for both the loan officers in the bank and also the private sector, the MSMEs. And one thing that stood out was the model that we have right now in the region is looks at only financial risk and credit risk, and that's it. So I think it was an eye opener for some of the participants from the banking and even the credit union sector that, okay, they need to look at more risk and market risk and operational risk and so on, and come up with an alternative. And then one thing that also stood out of the project is the fact that we do need to have alternative credit sort of models, credit scoring models. So while post that the central bank has actually launched a credit bureau, I'm still convinced we still need to use more alternative ones, especially dealing with the type of beneficiaries we're dealing with. The other thing that stood out, sectors that have always been deemed as extremely high risk, like agriculture, fishery, these actually attract interest rates of 14%. That's it. They even get it, right? So it was the first time, I believe, they started recognizing that another type of risk was actually quite major, which is the climate risk, and actually started incorporating some measures there. I wouldn't say it's a full ecosystem based approach to climate risk management, but at least it introduced that awareness there with those institutions. So for the most part, and as Nicole rightly said, over 70% of those MSMEs are women, actually. So even more. And when you look at the training, you even have a higher percentage, close to 85 to 90% being women. So while it wasn't designed for women, you had those as your beneficiaries benefiting. So over the period of 8 years, they all had over 1,000 participating MSMEs trained. They learned in very practical manner because they introduced game-based learning, which was fun, exciting, and really incorporated some realistic scenarios. So when it comes to some of the challenges we have in the region in terms of, ensuring you have that effective knowledge transfer, there's absorption capacity, these new types of engagement strategies actually work. So at the end, a lot of the SMEs were able to optimize their risk analysis holistically, as well as loan officers as well. And also they were able to identify. And I've seen some entrepreneurs coming out of that program I've seen like their pitch decks and so on. They literally do a proper risk analysis. So I'm seeing there is a sort of transformation happening in the ecosystem where this is concerned. So yeah, it was one of those good projects, but I think
well, I'm glad. Thanks, Kelly, for that. I'm glad to see that's happening, but I do know from my own interviews with financial institutions recently that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done around recognition that climate risk is real and it has an impact on the portfolio, and you need to factor that into your credit risk analysis. Many banks seem to feel as long as they have, since collateral is the order of the day in the Caribbean, and many of them are using property, as long as the property is insured, then, no need to worry about climate risk. But of course, what if the insurance company doesn't pay out? What then? So, it's not a simple slam dunk and a simple solution. So, but we get more into that in the next question. But I wanted to sort of open the floor now to participants, because we'd asked a couple of questions prior to the meeting, and I wanted to get a sense from you. What is your institution, your individual institution that you're in right now? What is happening in the green finance space, the green microfinance space as well? Is there any focus on sort of bringing women-owned businesses into the mix? If you could sort of give me some feedback, or give us some feedback rather. Who wants to start? Come on. I gave you a heads up with the questions before.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Brigitte. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Dr. Lester, and also all the guests that we have in this time. I think I really got a lot of interesting, practical information that is learned. So I gave a very brief introduction of myself. I'm coming from, no, so I'm not coming from. So, but I'm now in Suriname, where I'm working in Southern Commercial Bank. Actually, our bank is, let's say, a short history of bank that we exist for 13 years. And then we have a really focus on financial inclusion ideas. Meanwhile, that we also have a concept of having a digital solutions where we can promote financial inclusion in Suriname. So within this years, just a very small background. So we are the first bank who really come out with a mobile wallet solution where actually almost everyone in Suriname, they are eligible to access themselves through a mobile number. When you talk about the telecommunication company, we were excited because we work together with them, so that everyone who have actually a mobile number, they are able to have using the mobile phones to have a first line of tiers of access to a financial well, even for as simple as a payment. So that is what the bank is doing. Of course, we are also trying to expand with a lot of things. And then in this perspective, and we are very new, to be honest, in that area of like green finance and also in the perspective of particularly the climate structure. And that is also the reason that I said, hey, I really want to join this opportunity to have the membership program this year. So then we want to see what we can combine the strategy of the bank in terms of green financing, particularly for SMSE, because we have the same group of target group where we really want to serve on. But yes, as what we said also, this have a lot of challenges also in terms of knowledge, education, perspective, financial risk, also climate risk. So those things is for us, is for me, is a little bit new, but I'm here really to try to learn how to get the innovative ideas where we can combine technology, but also with the cases, the knowledge that I receive from here to see what we can do to design. And that is exactly what it is. We have I don't think that in Suriname green financing is a very um, very mature topic with us. And to be honest, recently Suriname is just helped with, oil and gas because they just find oil and gas, and that is another, challenges that we have. A lot of financial institutions really prefer to focus on really that sectors where that's why when I know there are participants from Guyana, I really also see, hey, how can I learn from you guys? Because Guyana is a few years before that. And when you are focusing on there, sometimes you also will miss the process of, hey, then what about the environmental, the party, and how I can balance it in that party. So in terms of experience, we are not really experienced yet. And then but we I want to get more information out of the training so that to see what we can do to create a possibility and the market on that aspect. And that's why I'm in learning phase. So based on the question that you asked, I would say, yeah, we are not there yet. We do not have really a green product or green finance product in that aspect. But I think there's a lot of insight that we really can get, and trying to use our technology to see what we can do. And one of the other thing we are really thinking of is using the data where we got from the solution, because um, when people do payments and all those things, it could be a factors where it shows how reliable, how trustworthy you are in terms of the payments, the payment of the loan, because one of the risks is default risk, right? And as a financial institution, we need to balance that. And another thing is, I know that for green financing, I always have an idea that you need to have a lot of funding available from like either public sector or IDB in order to make it, because they always want to tell you, hey, you need to give a lower interest rate. But in terms of a commercial bank's perspective, um, I also have a question. It will not be sustainable if you keep on using, a supporting funding out of it in order to create that loan. So in my perspective, as a financial institution person, I really want to learn um how what is the calculation, or let's say the experts that I can get in order to tell people, hey, no, you should not rely on only funding outside or available funding. How can you be able to sustain that so that even more commercial banks are willing to see, hey, this is a potential market where we should go into, where you could have sustainable profit, and also while you can do a lot of benefit out of it. So that's why when I think Nicola explained some structure of in Haiti, the project of doing that, although this is not really maybe a financing, but the outcome is really a mutual benefit for everyone. And I was very interesting. That is really a way that you can make it profitable, but at the same time, everyone actually are using kind of renewable devices in that aspect. So that is the background I want to give, and still looking forward to a lot of educational knowledge that I can get from the forum.
Great. Thank you so much, Virginie, for that intervention. This is a lot. This could be a whole other meeting.
Indeed.
There's so much here that we could talk about, and we're running out
Yes.
of time. But I don't know if we could somehow connect with you and give you, because I think even here with the experiences being exchanged with us and the participants, there's a lot you can learn and perhaps adapt. You made a very important point about bringing technology and using technology to kind of fast track this whole process, right? You do have, coming back to the whole customer centric idea, you do have very valuable information having rolled out this mobile wallet, right? And so how can you use that most effectively to push and move the needle in the green space? Will be very interesting to have a conversation around that and other things, right?
Yes.
But we'll rely on Benedict to see if we could organize something with you separately, just to kind of throw out some ideas that you could consider, or we could send you information that would be helpful. And
That
I'm
would be
sure
very
that
helpful.
the group that's here as well and the subsequent and previous speakers would also be willing to help you to kind of shape a green finance program coming from their different perspectives and experiences, right?
Thank you very much.
So
Yeah,
thank you
definitely.
again
The
for
context will
that.
be
Yes,
shared.
thank you.
So
Right.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
So Joanne, I think you wanted to add a comment.
Yes, thank you. My name is Joanne Bununi. I'm from Haiti. I have my business in Haiti. And I'm so grateful for the example that was mentioned earlier, because I worked as a compliance officer for Sogebank for 22 years, which is the mother company of Soge Express.
Lovely.
And in that specific project, Soge Express wanted to go further into their process of inclusion and climate products. But we face several issues. First of all, it's the compliance issue, because when you want to attain critical mass, especially in climate mitigation or resilience, you have to deal with agricultures. So the legislation doesn't provide for farmers to have commercial rights, so they cannot sign contracts. So even going into the technology to sign smart contract, the legislation has to be changed. That was the first issue. The second issue is that when you mentioned collateral, the collateral is considered as resale value. The land where the crops are built, if you want to invest in adaptation or resilience, is considered as a resale value. And it is very risky when you have that compliance risk. And I find that in the business right now, while we're thinking about financial products, there needs to be more of a collaboration between several stakeholders. For example, in the case of, if we keep using the case of Sogebank, you would need people that can, specialists that can assess the value of the land based on the production. So based on what the land can produce, you assess the value, and then you give it, you can lend based on that value. You need insurance companies that can vouch and ensure at least not the repayment of the purchase of the land, but at least the repayment of the entrance, the seeds, the whatever the farmer needs as a loan. And then you also need information. You also need to educate people on what it is that they're trying to achieve for the funds that are used to be effective. And I don't know what other countries in this forum have already resolved these problems, but I would love to continue the conversation, like I said in the chat offline, because these are problems that we face. Specifically, when you think about agribusiness, the majority of the population that are in agribusiness, not to say it's not 100%, but it's very, very close. It's 85%. They are women. They own the land, but because of cultural reasons and because of lack of financial literacy, they cannot have access to these funds. So even if you put in place a $100 million fund for climate adaptation and resilience, the people who really can benefit from it will not have the knowledge. And you will fall into big corporations having access to those funds and not doing eco-friendly or climate preservation projects. So mass production. That was my comment. Thank you.
No, this is very good. Thank you so much. The whole issue of financial literacy, awareness, all of that is a huge area that I was hoping we'd be able to get to. I'm not sure if we can.
Compliance as well.
But compliance as well. It's a huge, I see Telly nodding, yes, yes. But it's absolutely one of the key barriers that we face right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, let me just say too, land ownership. Yeah, yes, you're mentioning women owning the land, but many times people are farming and they don't own the land, and you can't find the title. So it's a complicated
compliance,
right? Complicated situation, agriculture, and I think we need to fix it.
In the case of Soja Express, we even thought about using the phone company. That the people own the phone, having the phone in their name. We could possibly use their phone bill as proof of address, but even that was irrelevant. And we had a lot of problems compliance wise because of the Mocash. If you Nicole probably heard about it. It's the money Soja Express bundle with the telecom company to provide money service business transfers, but that also became another issue of compliance. So in the line of work that I do now, I'm no longer in Sojibank. We focus on economic development, and we provide business advisory service to specifically that segment to try to find solutions to get funds to that segment so they can produce more and move then to mainstream banking.
Yeah, let me add one thing. Of course, the project that we did with Soja Express did not involve Soja Bank. We tried. It was just, Soja Bank was sitting there. It just looked like such a fantastic partner to think about working with. And actually, where we thought we might be able to find a symbiotic relationship was loans to the women who were agents, who served as agents to help them expand their business. But they didn't actually end up doing that. So sometimes these projects of integrating different elements of a consortium can be successful. And sometimes you have to wait, until everyone catches up with your innovative idea. But Joanne, I would love to talk to you.
I am smiling, Nicole, because I was responsible for it not going through. Because at that time I was the compliance officer.
No, the truth comes out. Full circle moment.
One of the things we could also spend a whole session on is risk. And
yes,
risk is both about perception, which is, helping to explain why it perhaps isn't as risky as it looks. And risk is about the reality. If a hurricane comes through every year, that is a real risk. That's not perceived. Everyone can see it, It doesn't matter who you are. So I think there's a whole set of conversations about risk, which I think are fascinating.
We looked at several mechanisms within the insurance company inside the group to find out so the insurance company did not have land specialists to guarantee. And then we looked also at the notaries to certify the ownership. We looked at every aspect, and it was too risky for what it would bring as revenue to the commercial bank. Right. And that was my priority. So I'm sorry.
Exactly. And that's right, because you're ultimately a fiduciary and you should be acting on risk that feels comfortable for you. And you can also change your mind later if it seems less risky.
Well, now I have because I'm on the other side now. I'm defending the farmers within the foundation Bracing Neighbors, we are defending the farmers, working on business advisory and doing economic development. So I'm on the other side. I understand that side of the gate, but I'm on the other side right now. And that is the purpose of attending this mentorship, is to try to find solution and propose solution, because we do have a very good relationship with all the financial institutions, and we can move the needle, but be specific as to how to move the needle.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. This has been very interesting. I think I saw Natasha with her hand up, and I was one other person, I think. Was it
LaShawn? I think we also had her
LaShawna
hand
was
up.
first, and then Natasha.
Or yeah, I think so. Yeah.
No? Natasha?
Winston, I
LaShawna?
just want to
LaShawn?
add something.
Hello, hi.
LaShawn?
So sorry, I had microphone issues. Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
All right. So one of my
Your mic is a
concerns
little
one
much
of my
better.
concerns is that currently the institution where I work, we do finance green loans. However, it is not tailored to women or persons of a lower income. It's done by a case by case basis, obviously, and everything has to almost be perfect for you to be able to be approved for these loans. And oftentimes heartbreaking, because it's not given the persons or the vulnerable groups who are in dire need of these loans and these finances to be able to expand their business or even to recover from loss that they would have suffered, because we too are affected by climate change. And for instance, in Guyana, there's a lot of women in the hinterland areas too who are dependent solely on farming, and these women, they don't even have identification cards to be able to even come to us to say, you know, I'd like a loan for seeds or, you know, irrigation or whatever it is. So while we are making strides, we still do have a long way to go into making our loans more inclusive. And you know, so we do need help in avenues like that.
Great. Thank you so much, LaShawn. Natasha?
Hear me?
Hi, Natasha. Nice to see you.
Hi. This is a very interesting discussion, I must say. And I think for where I sit, the challenge has to be, how do you balance the needs of your market or your customer with the importance of sustainability when you look at a financial institution, where you have regulators who give you benchmarks, 1% return on assets, and all of those good things that you have to meet. While we want to cater to the needs of the market, we're also bound by what our NPLs are supposed to be. So it's a difficult balance. And one of our approaches has been seeking avenues for funding, that's concessionary funding, through projects, as opposed to, so those become more or less off the books, as opposed to looking directly in your main portfolio. Because the challenge when you attempt to merge, especially adaptation financing, when you start talking energy, it pays for itself. But when you start talking adaptation, the challenge is, how do you balance your financial requirements with being able to provide and meet your lower tier customers, to meet those needs.
This is a very, very good point, because it captures the sort of between a rock and hard place situation where many banks, development banks as well, find themselves, right?
Yeah.
This is why I think some of this work needs to happen with the microfinance institutions who are closer to the client, who are in the community, who know the needs, et cetera, et cetera. Not to say that, banks should be off the hook, but I think there needs to be a more nuanced involvement, shall we say, by the microfinance institutions in the sector. We're running out of time. So I think what I'm going to do now is to sort of bring things home and talk more about systemic change and ask each of my team to speak very briefly about how can we sort of make sure that the changes that we're advocating, the models we've discussed will stick, and and we create a more green inclusive finance culture, if you will, with a gender lens across the Caribbean. So I want to start with Nicole.
Okay. Thank you, Winsome. I think it's really a dynamic conversation. I think we're seeing more than course interest here, because I think when we look at some of the initiatives that have been in the market in terms of from the credit guarantee perspective, and Telly spoke about the Eastern Caribbean initiative. Natasha is also speaking about the concerns and interest from the Grenada Development Bank, from the DFI perspective. I would encourage us to look back at some of the examples both in the region and outside the region, probably more so, in terms of blended finance approaches to lower risk, right? And address some of those concerns that you were speaking about there, Natasha. What we've seen, especially in the space in terms of climate and gender, is a need to, of course, have a combination of, and that is the blended finance of grants, public sector capital. How do we attract private investors? So what could we look at?
If I could just stick a pin there a second, could you just mention in there that there has to be there's a huge knowledge gap in the region on both demand and supply sides around these instruments.
Yes.
So I think even before we start trying to push these into the region, and they should be pushed into the region, there has to be running alongside that a huge effort around filling those knowledge gaps, people understanding what these instruments do and they don't do, what's appropriate, when, in what context, in what industry.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just continue.
No, Winsome, that's perfect, because it ties back, right? If we think to what Nikki was saying from the beginning in terms of on the demand side, and let's see that, let's think of it now in terms of these entities. Of course, they're the suppliers of the financing, but on the demand side, they're thinking, how do we understand that there's a gap. What do we need to do to create the kinds of products that would be able to address the concerns of the DFIs, commercial capital, and if there's a case of philanthropic bank? I think where we start there is the fact, what does all of this mean? How do we even approach that? So what we see is that in any area of work, and Telly is the super expert on stakeholder approaches and that kind of thing, it really requires first of all, an awareness, which I think we're seeing a lot of now, right? Even seeing the language on the landscape, Winsome. And then an understanding of what needs to be done in terms of different products and that kind of thing, and how to address the various issues in terms of risk and that kind of thing, and profitability.
The risk profile of the different kinds of
instruments. And the profitability, because as Natasha and Regine rightfully point out, that's where the rubber hits the road. Right? And then how do we then create collectively? So it's not, and I think what's great about this conversation is that we're hearing both from the participants and from us colleagues speaking, that it's not just financial education, which I prefer to use the word rather than literacy, on the demand side, on the MSME side, but very much so for the fund managers and those investment and financial managers within the organizations.
Right.
Okay.
I also think too that there's a role, the development banks, commercial banks, microfinance institutions all have their respective roles to play in the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So let's not trip over each other trying to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Things that commercial banks can do, the bigger deals, let's say, microfinance institutions won't and shouldn't do. They're focusing on the community level. So collectively, and this comes back to Nikki's point, I think it was Telly's point as well, about stakeholder engagement and collaboration. It means that everybody has to be rowing in the same direction with each of these pieces of the sector. I know it's wishful thinking. Each piece of the sector.
No. I'm just saying it's well said. It's well said, right?
Playing a respective role, right?
Good analogy.
I'm sorry. Let me switch now to Telly and then to Nikki.
Okay, so a lot has been said. Let me try and be a little concise, very difficult. So first and foremost, coming back to design, for sustainability and to be responsive and actionable, financial institutions need to design gender sensitive or even gender transformative financial products that really address unique barriers that women face. So these would also include some of those, should I say, emotional barriers, aspirational barriers. So this is where you need to then adopt and learn how to do, should I say, customer discovery for innovation. So using things like empathy map tools, like empathy mapping, jobs to be done, will give you that granular perspective. And now finally, you can incorporate that into your CRM and have a 360 view, but it doesn't just cover functional areas. You understand that customer on an emotional, on a social, on an aspirational basis, and therefore you can craft a holistic program. So this brings me to a practical example. So the last year, I was doing work with CPDC, and we were going to many countries, Jamaica, Antigua, Grenada, and so on, doing these community level workshops, doing these technical workshops, first to introduce the concept of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, which is, of course, as you identify, a big knowledge gap. But now take it to a granular level where we now start to unpack who are these vulnerable groups, vulnerable communities, and then flesh it out to understand what are their priorities and do some practical sessions where they're able to actually think it's not just one product. So a woman might want and need something on the superficial sense, but you're also addressing emotional needs, social care, women. So when you have that comprehensive package, you are really going to be optimizing your bottom line. So that's also another capacity or training that needs to be given to see that moving in this direction truly actually unpacks value. So it's value creation. So that's one thing. The second thing is understanding other barriers. Okay, they lack collateral, limited financial literacy. So you must have that capacity building package. And if I get to a granular level where you're like, normally we give loans and so on, why not package and offer a loan? Well, if it is a loan they're getting, but they're also getting a wealth building product at the same time, but they need that capacity. So it's us understanding this in order to develop. So the second thing too, and I think one of the big key things when we're talking about those vulnerable groups, and I'll now pivot to look at agriculture and fisheries, which are really those industries, and even to some extent, SMEs are in tourism, right? Vulnerable. In some cases, one of the reasons why loan products don't necessarily work is because of their cyclical nature of the products and so on. So how about revenue-based financing? You can look at international models. I think there was last year, there was a pilot by a bank, a cooperative bank in Ethiopia, which actually included the model. And the reason why I mention it revenue-based modeling has been around, but not necessarily seen financial institutions really incorporated. Yes, this would have some implication to a different kind of risk management, and I heard it. In the case of Suriname, you already have your data points. You just need to leverage those data points, and you have the opportunity to create an alternative credit model. But using these flexible repayment terms, alternative collaborative collateral options is important. So
Right.
I take the point that the fact that the regulations and the framework don't allow you to operate in such a way. But the hack around that, and I've seen institutions even within our region, they create subsidiaries. And these subsidiaries partner with innovative partners and startups and so on. You're getting
Right.
finance institutions in other regions are now setting up incubators, innovation labs, and so on in a regulated space, and they work along with regulations. Last thing, in terms of incorporating that blended finance, it's very easy to look and see which partners you can work with, even on the institutional level, to try and develop guarantees. There's a movement now for blended finance, and not everyone wants to be at the level of delivery, but they don't mind creating these, putting these into vehicles for guarantees. Look at the Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee System. They learned their lesson, and now they're giving 50,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars, which is about 25,000 US dollars, to startups, adding the hand holding, plus putting an allocation and paying for an accountant. So that's another thing, because one of our challenges is having that history.
Yeah.
So looking at digital tools, my last thing, sorry, is the digital tools. Very fundamental. You learn lessons from like Estonia, where the banking system actually incorporated digital ID. I know Jamaica has just launched a digital ID. It was national, but these are the type of tools that would now address some of the compliance issues. So,
well, I think you're just basically taking a lot of things that are being done mainstream and pushing them into the green finance space, basically, because a lot of these things, like the training, running capacity building alongside a loan product, for example, makes perfect sense, because you need to make sure that these folks understand how to run their business so they can pay the loan back. So this is not rocket science, guys. This is just really taking that successful framework and moving into a gender smart green microfinance context, or green finance context, let's say. Thanks so much for that, Telly. Nikki? Nikki?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
I'm waiting for your question.
Sorry, no, the same question about sustainability. How can we really make some of these strategies we've been talking about sustainable from a gender lens perspective, looking at the green finance space? You talked about some of this already, meaning, focus on the customer, do your research, gather your data to actually figure out what the client wants. This has been a theme throughout this discussion. Do you have anything else to add to that based on your experience?
Yeah, I think I would start there. And, it's really one of the key things is helping clients to understand their exposure to climate risk. The fact that extreme weather is happening every year, not once in 100 years, and it's creating major destruction to assets and power outages. And then once you work that out, to proactively work out what financial instruments or other measures could address that risk. And so I like the way Nicole was talking about financial education. That is the way we talk about it. We actually talk about it as financial and energy education, because there's kind of an absence of knowledge about how these two things fit together. And we did some fascinating work in India on what we called the energy diaries, where we had clients document their expenditures and usage of energy on a daily basis. And there were really, really interesting gender and regional differences that helped the MFIs to tailor their business models in a much more specific way. One of the things that was really interesting for us to learn in the Indian context was that women are the primary beneficiaries because of a point you made earlier, which is that a lot of the businesses are home-based and women are the ones who are in that home most of the day. So crafting models that take that into account. We actually found a really interesting other thing. One of our partners was an energy finance company that had a pay-as-you-go system, and they were convinced that it was completely foolproof and that they didn't need loan officers because it was so brilliant, the technology was so brilliant. And through the energy diaries process, we learned that clients were actually bypassing the system. So they were having a payment issue. And of course, you know, our recommendation was, you might think you don't need loan officers, but you really do need loan officers. So it was really, really interesting. And they were shocked, you know, it just didn't occur to them that the technology could be circumvented by people who were in that particular part of the world, illiterate, you know, low income. I think people are really clever wherever you go on the planet. So that was a really interesting lesson learned. So I think that there are lots of mechanisms to go deep on gaining client knowledge and working out how to incorporate that and how to adjust your business model. And the thing that I would add is, I think being very rigid about the business model often ends up leading to lost opportunities. It's not that you're wrong, it's that there are opportunities that you're missing by not looking around the edges of the business model, you know, and kind of taking that knowledge into account. But it sounds like the group here are really good at that. So I'm super excited to see what happens in the Caribbean as a result of this webinar, and just the movement generally to acknowledging that climate finance is going to be key in the future for all of us, whether we're a micro entrepreneur or whether we're a big bank or a municipality or, you know, a state or a country. So I hope I answered your question, Winsome.
No, you did. Great. Thank you so much. I'm not going to attempt to summarize this discussion because one, it is so rich. We have the recording. Two, folks are going to do that next week. But I just wanted to throw out some keywords that sort of resonated with me and probably with some of you as well. The whole notion of disruption, basically changing the traditional model of how financing is done in the region. Two, client-centric approaches, doing your homework, gathering your data. Three, education, financial education about new instruments, green inclusive financing with a gender lens, etc., both on the demand and supply sides, right? And finally, I think leverage, or maybe not finally, but second to last, technology, how to include technology in this process. And then finally, partnerships, how to leverage effective partnerships to get some of this done, you know, perhaps looking at innovative approaches to building partnerships to really, in the final analysis, sort of embed the gender lens approach, not only in financing in the region, but specifically around green finance. So with that, I'll close and say thank you so much for your participation. I really had a lot of fun in this session. I don't know about all of you, but I hope we can continue in some form the discussion, because I think collectively we can make some changes, but perhaps move the needle a little bit in this sector. So Benedict, thanks so much for inviting us, and hope to engage further as we go along.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Winsome. And to all of the mentors, Nikki, Telly, Nicola, really, this has been super, super interesting for me. Also, I took a little bit of a backseat and was just listening, but also making a lot of notes and yeah, feeling really also inspired on what was shared. I think Winsome, as well as the other mentors, you summarized basically the big topics of the discussion super well. And I think I'd also just like to add on the education part, this is the whole sort of point and the goal that we're trying to achieve through this mentorship program is, you know, really educating everyone present, but also inspiring people to sort of, you know, achieve change, do what they can, look across like a little bit further than the business model or further than their plate, let's say, to see what is possible in their communities and their institutions, and how they can achieve sort of, you know, yeah, impactful opportunities, let's say. So Thank you so much. This has been super, super interesting. To all of the participants, of course, I'll be sharing the contacts as I've done in the past as well, and the recording, the presentations tomorrow. And to the mentors, if you are interested, we also have a WhatsApp group that I can send you an invite link to in case you'd want to continue discussions there and exchange per telephone. It might be a little bit easier. And just to close, I would like to quickly show you just a quick view on what to expect over the next couple of weeks. So right now, this is actually the last session of the theoretical foundation, so the first module, and I think it was a perfect close to sort of introducing the topic of resilience finance and gender inclusive finance in general. So we currently are at session 4, and then next week we will have the wrap up of this first module. We'll sort of go through the topics that we've learned and discussed, and I'll also introduce you to what you can expect for the second module. I know that LaShawn, you were saying that you'd like to learn a little bit on, or I think in general, everyone, on creating these financial instruments, how to implement these strategies, and that's the whole point of the second module. So after having had this theoretical foundational introduction, we will then on the second module focus on concrete applications. What is, strategies that you can implement in your institution? How do you design these products? What taxonomies you can follow, and so on and so forth. So excited to be introducing you all to that next week. The session itself will probably be a little bit shorter, so 60 minutes, seeing as we won't have a presentation from any of the mentors. And we also won't be having a recap of any of the buddy teams. That will be at the beginning of session 6. So next week the buddy team is off, but you will be back on session 6. And I think that's all of my announcements. We do also have check-ins with some buddy teams tomorrow. So buddy team 3, LaShawn and Donna, buddy team 7, Anne-Marie and Sandra, and as well as buddy team 2, or Auricel and Regine will also be, I'll be checking in with you tomorrow. And I think with that, we'll close the session. Once again, huge thank you to the mentors. Huge thank you to the participants for the active engagement. It's been really, really great. And with that, wishing you a good rest of your Wednesday, good rest of the week. And I'll see the participants then next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks, Benedict.
Thanks
Bye.
again, Benedict.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Thank you.